The morning sun pierced the glass walls of the office, reflecting ambition and betrayal in equal measure. James said, "This was supposed to be my promotion, my future, my reward for years of sacrifice." His voice trembled, but his eyes burned. Across the boardroom, Richard leaned back in his leather chair, smiling faintly, savoring control. Richard said, "You should have known the game better, James. Loyalty means nothing when the stakes are survival." Gasps spread across the room as colleagues whispered, avoiding James' eyes, afraid to be caught in the storm. James clenched his fists, his chest tight with the weight of humiliation. He thought of the nights spent at his desk, the weekends lost, the dreams crushed by the man he once called mentor. He remembered Richard's promises, empty now, twisted into poison. His world spun as betrayal sank in, and with every second, shame turned into something darker. Resolve. James said, "You think this is over, Richard, but it's only the beginning." His words cut through the silence like shattered glass. Richard smirked, dismissing him as if he were already defeated. But James' heart beat louder than ever. Rage had taken root, and revenge whispered its first breath. James sat alone in the cafeteria, the laughter of others echoing like knives against his silence. He replayed Richard's words, each one heavier than the last. He whispered, "All that work, all those nights, stolen in a single breath." His colleagues passed by, eyes avoiding his presence, afraid of being dragged into his downfall. Betrayal felt thicker than the coffee he gripped tightly in his hands. The bitterness spread across his tongue, reminding him of his broken dreams. He remembered his mother's voice telling him, "One day your work will speak for you." But the words had been silenced by a man who played the game dirtier. James' heart ached, yet a flicker of rage refused to be extinguished. He thought, "Richard thinks he ended me, but he only forged something stronger." He stared at the reflection in the glass window. Not the broken man everyone saw, but a shadow of the fire rising within. The cafeteria buzzed, but James sat in his storm, growing colder, harder, sharper. Richard stood in his office, phone pressed to his ear, his tone casual yet dripping with power. Richard said, "James was too weak, too naive. He never understood survival." His assistant listened quietly, nodding though her stomach twisted. Richard stared out the window, the city skyline reflecting his ambition. Every success he had built was laced with manipulation, but he called it strategy. He thought of James as nothing more than a stepping stone. He smirked, whispering into the phone, "The game rewards those who strike first." He closed his eyes, savoring the silence after betrayal. Yet faint unease brushed his thoughts. A whisper he ignored. James sat in his car in the dark parking garage, the silence pressing against his chest. He slammed the steering wheel, whispering, "I gave him everything, and he destroyed me." The echo filled the empty space like a ghost. His breath fogged the windshield as despair clawed at him. Yet as the minutes passed, the fog cleared in his mind. He saw Richard smirk, remembered the whispers, and rage surged like lightning. James said no more. "I won't let him write my ending." His hands shook, not from fear but from the weight of his decision. Outside the building, shadows stretched across the street as the city buzzed. James walked with heavy steps, his thoughts boiling. Across the street, an older man watched him with knowing eyes. Daniel said quietly, "I've seen this path before." The mentor's face carried scars of battles long past, his silence more powerful than words. James didn't notice him, too lost in his rage. But Daniel thought, "He will need me soon or he'll be consumed by his fire." James sat at his small apartment desk, piles of rejection emails glowing on his laptop screen. His hands trembled as he whispered, "I built everything for him, and he left me with nothing." His heart felt hollow, like an abandoned building. He thought of late nights typing until his eyes blurred, believing Richard's promises. James said, "All my loyalty, all my sacrifice," erased with a smirk. He slammed the laptop shut, his chest rising and falling like a storm trapped in a cage. Memories of laughter with colleagues stabbed at him, their faces now turned away in fear. Shame wrapped around him like a chain, but within the links, sparks of anger began to flicker. He stood, staring into the cracked mirror on his wall. His reflection didn't show the man they had broken, but a shadow reshaping into something sharper. James whispered, "You destroyed my career, Richard, but you didn't destroy me." The silence of the apartment echoed his vow. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. James walked slowly, each step heavy. On the bed lay Sarah, a former colleague whose career Richard also destroyed. Sarah whispered, "He took everything from me." Her voice cracked, thin as broken glass. James sat beside her, holding her trembling hand. He thought, this is the cost of his greed, lives shattered without mercy. Sarah's eyes glistened with tears as she said, "Don't let him do this to anyone else." Her words carved into James' chest, leaving scars he could never hide. He nodded, his throat tight, rage deepening. The fluorescent lights hummed above them, merciless in their brightness. James said softly, "I promise you, Sarah, he will pay." The room felt smaller, suffocating, but James' fire grew larger, pressing against the walls. Sarah closed her eyes, her breathing fragile, leaving James alone with his vow. Night cloaked the parking lot as James unlocked his car, but a shadow moved quickly. A tall figure stepped out, Mark, Richard's enforcer. Mark said, "You should stop pushing back, James." His voice rumbled like distant thunder. James froze, sensing danger, but his jaw clenched. He replied, "I won't stay silent while he destroys lives." Mark, towering and broad, took a step closer, his stare cold. He said, "Richard can make things worse for you." James' chest tightened, but fear twisted into resolve. He thought, if he sends men to silence me, then I've already struck a nerve. The tension cut the night air, each breath visible in the cold. James stepped closer, defiance in his eyes, whispering, "Tell Richard I'm not afraid anymore." Mark's expression flickered, uncertainty hidden beneath intimidation. Then he turned, fading into the shadows, leaving James alone, fire blazing stronger than fear. The cafe buzzed with quiet chatter, but James and Emily sat in silence. Emily, once his closest friend, stirred her coffee nervously. Emily said, "James, maybe it's time to move on." Her voice shook with worry. James stared at her, his eyes burning. He replied, "He took everything, Emily. You want me to just forget?" Emily looked down, her hands trembling on the cup. She whispered, "I'm scared of what this is doing to you." James felt torn, her words pressing on the edges of his rage. He thought of nights they once laughed, and how distance grew after Richard's betrayal. He said, "I can't heal until I've faced him." Emily's eyes filled with sorrow, her lips parting but no words escaping. Silence stretched between them, heavier than the air around. The cafe noise felt distant, swallowed by the storm building in James' chest. The night air was sharp as James walked through a quiet park. On a bench sat Daniel, his weathered face lit faintly by a street lamp. Daniel said, "Revenge is a dangerous road." His voice carried the weight of regret. James stopped, shoulders tense. He replied, "Dangerous or not, it's the only road I have left." Daniel's eyes narrowed, studying the fire burning in James' stare. He said, "I've walked it before, and it nearly destroyed me." James' heart pounded, torn between listening and rejecting. He thought of Sarah's tears, of Richard's smirk. He whispered, "Then teach me how not to be destroyed." Daniel leaned forward, shadows deepening his scars. He said softly, "If you're willing to listen, I'll guide you. But the line between justice and ruin is razor thin." The wind rustled through the trees as their uneasy bond began to form. James stood in his apartment, the desk cluttered with old papers and shredded reminders of a career stolen. His hands trembled as he gathered reports, resumes, and notes written in desperation. He whispered, all this was for him, and he took it away. His eyes burned as he struck a match and watched flames lick the edges of the paper. The crackling fire filled the silence, illuminating his face with resolve. He said, "This ends tonight. I won't be the broken man he left behind." His chest heaved as the smoke spiraled upward, carrying away years of loyalty. In the reflection of the glass window, he no longer saw a victim, but a man reborn through fire. His jaw tightened as he whispered, "Richard, you created this version of me. Now you'll face him." The ashes floated into the air, marking the beginning of his transformation. Daniel met James in the same park where shadows always seem to speak louder than words. James said, "I've burned the past. Now I want to know how to fight." Daniel's weary eyes scanned him, recognizing both courage and danger. He replied, "Fire can forge or consume, James. You must decide which path you'll walk." James leaned forward, fists clenched, his voice sharp. He said, "Teach me how to strike back without losing myself." Daniel sighed, the night wind tugging at his coat. He whispered, "Strength without control destroys. Strategy without patience fails. If you seek revenge, you'll need balance." James' chest tightened, but determination didn't waver. He said, "Then show me the balance, because I refuse to stay broken." Daniel's gaze hardened, accepting the role he long avoided. He replied, "Very well, but the first lesson is knowing the cost of every strike." Emily sat across from James in her apartment, her face pale as she listened. James said, "I'm going after Richard. This isn't just revenge, it's survival." Emily's voice broke as she replied, "You'll lose yourself, James. You're not that man." He leaned forward, his eyes like steel. He said, "I can't let his betrayal define me. I need your help." Emily's hands trembled, coffee cup rattling on the table. She whispered, "I don't agree with your path, but I can't abandon you." James felt a pang of relief, but also guilt pressing against his chest. He thought, "Her fear is proof of the danger I'm walking into." Emily's eyes glistened as she said, "If I follow you, I'll carry the burden too." James replied firmly, "We'll carry it together. I won't turn back." The fragile bond between loyalty and fear tied them closer in silence. James sifted through old company files hidden in a storage unit. Dust clung to the air, and every folder revealed fragments of Richard's lies. He whispered, "Every success was built on someone else's ruin." His hands shook as he discovered forged signatures, altered contracts, and memos designed to frame innocent employees. James said, "This isn't just betrayal, it's a pattern." Rage surged as the truth unfolded, but with it came clarity. Richard hadn't targeted James by chance, he had destroyed others before him. James clenched the papers, thinking of Sarah, of countless silent victims. He whispered, "You think you've hidden your crimes, Richard, but I'll tear your mask apart." The unit's flickering light bulb buzzed, shadows stretching like claws across the walls. His chest pounded, each heartbeat echoing a vow of war. For the first time, James had a weapon, the truth. In a crowded cafe, James slipped a file across the table to Emily. Her eyes widened as she flipped through the evidence of Richard's corruption. Emily whispered, "This could ruin him." James nodded, his voice low. He said, "This is only the beginning. I want him exposed piece by piece." Emily's face tightened as she asked, "Are you ready for the storm this will bring?" James replied, "The storm has already begun. I'm just turning it back on him." His chest swelled with resolve as he watched her expression shift from fear to reluctant agreement. The hum of the cafe blurred into silence around them, the weight of the file pressing like destiny between their hands. Emily said quietly, "Then we move carefully. One wrong step and he'll destroy us both." James answered, "Then we won't step wrong." James' footsteps echoed in the dim alley as he clutched the folder of evidence. A voice growled from the shadows. Mark stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the exit. Mark said, "You don't know when to quit." James straightened his shoulders, heart pounding but eyes firm. He replied, "If Richard sent you, it means I'm getting close." Mark smirked, cracking his knuckles, the tension thick as steel wires. He said, "Close to a grave if you keep this up." James clenched the folder tighter, unwilling to back down. He whispered, "Fear doesn't own me anymore." The alley reeked of danger, the silence broken only by the thud of Mark's boots approaching. James took a step closer, defiance written in every line of his face. His chest rose with resolve. He said firmly, "Tell Richard, I won't stop until he falls." Mark's glare flickered for a second, but he masked it quickly, fading back into the dark, leaving James with burning determination. Emily paced her apartment, her hands trembling as James laid out Richard's crimes across the table. James said, "This is enough to expose him." Emily's eyes darted nervously across the papers. She whispered, "James, this is dangerous. If he finds out, we'll both be targets." James' voice hardened as he replied, "He already made me his target. Now it's my turn." Emily shook her head, gripping her chest. She said, "I can't watch you destroy yourself." James reached across the table, his hand steady over hers. He whispered, "You don't have to watch. Just stand with me." Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she realized his resolve was unshakable. She said softly, "I'm scared for you." James answered, "So am I. But fear won't stop me anymore." Silence filled the room as their loyalty was tested against the storm closing in. The library was empty, the silence broken only by pages turning. James sat at a corner table, stacks of company records spread before him. His eyes lit with fire as he traced names and dates. He whispered, "Every ruin he left behind is here." His fingers brushed over signatures, falsified promotions and sabotaged careers. James thought of Sarah, her broken voice in the hospital bed. He clenched his jaw. "Death," he said. "This is his weakness. He leaves scars everywhere he steps." The fluorescent lights buzzed, shadows bending across the pages. His pulse quickened as he pieced together a map of Richard's destruction. James whispered, "You hid in power, but truth will strip you bare." Every paper he stacked became another weapon, sharper than knives. His chest swelled with grim purpose, the silence of the library amplifying the storm within him. James visited Sarah again, the hospital room colder than before. Her frail body sank deeper into the sheets, but her eyes searched his face with quiet desperation. Sarah whispered, "You found something, didn't you?" James nodded, his voice low. He said, "I have proof, Sarah. Proof of everything he's done." Her lips curved faintly into a broken smile, though pain carved her features. She whispered, "Then don't stop, James. Don't let him win again." James' heart squeezed as he held her hand, the fragility of her grip reminding him of everything at stake. He whispered, "I'll see this through, for you." The beeping machines filled the silence, cruel reminders of time running out. Sarah's eyes shimmered with tears as she whispered, "Make it count." James clenched his jaw, his soul carved in steel by her words. He said softly, "I promise you, I will." Daniel stood at the edge of the park, watching James pace with restless energy. Daniel said, "You've gathered proof, but proof alone isn't enough. You'll need strategy." James stopped, glaring into the night air. He replied, "Then tell me how to use it." Daniel's eyes narrowed, the shadows deepening his scars. He whispered, "Expose him too fast and he'll bury you. Strike too slow and he'll bury others." James clenched his fists, the frustration boiling over. He said, "I can't wait forever, Daniel. Every day he destroys more lives." Daniel stepped forward, voice sharp. He said, "And if you rush, you'll join the list of his victims." Silence pressed down on them, broken only by the rustle of leaves. James whispered, "Then teach me the timing." Daniel's gaze softened, almost fatherly. He said, "Very well. But once you start, there's no turning back." James entered Emily's apartment, his hands clutching more files. He said, "This will break Richard completely." Emily's face stiffened, fear flashing in her eyes. She whispered, "James, I need to tell you something." He froze, sensing the weight in her voice. Emily's hands trembled as she admitted, "I told Richard about you once. I was scared. I thought he'd leave me alone if I gave him something." James' chest tightened, his breath jagged. He whispered, "You betrayed me?" Emily's tears fell, her voice breaking. She said, "I didn't know he'd go this far. I regret it every second." Rage and sorrow warred inside James as the walls seemed to close in. His voice cut the silence. He said, "You chose him over me." Emily's sobs filled the room as James turned away, shattered by the truth. Mark waited in the shadows of a deserted parking garage, his posture uneasy. James stepped forward, anger sharp in his voice. James said, "How long will you keep following Richard like a dog?" Mark's jaw clenched, but his tone wavered. He replied, "You don't understand. I owe him." James' eyes narrowed as he pressed, "Owe him what? Your freedom? Your soul?" Mark's face twitched, memories flashing behind his glare. He whispered, "He saved me once, and I've been paying ever since." James stepped closer, his voice low. He said, "He doesn't save people. He owns them." Mark looked away, silence gnawing at his conviction. For the first time, James saw doubt flicker in the enforcer's cold eyes. The chains of loyalty were cracking. James scoured through old digital archives late into the night, his fingers racing over the keyboard. His eyes froze as a file revealed Richard's plan years in the making. He whispered, "This wasn't chance. It was designed." Dates lined up like bullets, every promotion, every fall, carefully orchestrated by Richard. James's chest heaved as he realized his downfall had been scripted long before. His voice cracked as he said, "He didn't just betray me. He planned to destroy me from the start." Rage surged like wildfire, but with it came icy clarity. Richard had never seen him as a colleague, only a target in a game of power. James whispered into the silence, "You wrote my ending years ago, Richard, but now I'll write yours." His hands shook as he printed the evidence, the pages trembling like weapons. Daniel sat with James in the quiet park, his face more somber than ever. Daniel said, "There's something I never told you." James turned sharply, sensing the gravity in his mentor's voice. Daniel exhaled deeply, whispering, "Years ago I worked with Richard. I thought he was my ally, but he betrayed me too." James' chest tightened with disbelief. He said, "You knew him? And you never warned me?" Daniel's eyes glistened with regret. He replied, "I thought I could bury the past, but watching you suffer dragged it back." James' jaw clenched, fury battling with betrayal. He said, "You let me walk into his trap blind." Daniel bowed his head, his voice hoarse. "I failed once. I don't want you to repeat my mistake." The night air felt heavier as James wrestled with this revelation, trust breaking yet another layer. Emily sat trembling at the kitchen table, the air thick with dread. James stood across from her, his voice sharp. He said, "You told him my secrets, you became his weapon." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears as she whispered, "I didn't mean for this. I thought I was protecting you." James' fists slammed against the table, making her flinch. He shouted, "You gave him the knife to cut me open." Emily buried her face in her hands, sobbing. She whispered, "Then let me help fix it. Let me undo what I did." James stared at her, rage and pain twisting his features. He said coldly, "Trust is not given twice." Emily's sobs filled the silence, the fragile bridge between them collapsing into ruin. James turned away, his eyes burning with a vow that nothing would stop him now, not even betrayal from the closest heart. James stood outside Richard's skyscraper office, the folder of evidence heavy in his grip. His heart thundered, but his eyes were cold steel. He whispered, "This is the endgame." Emily trailed behind him, hesitant, whispering, "James, once you step in there, you can't go back." He turned to her, voice firm. He said, "There's no going back for me. Not anymore." Daniel appeared from the shadows of the lobby, his expression carved with concern. He said, "Timing is everything. Strike too early, and he'll crush you." James met his mentor's gaze, jaw locked. He replied, "No more delays. The storm starts now." Mark emerged from a dark corner, silent, his expression unreadable, torn between loyalty and truth. For a brief moment, silence pressed like a final warning. James inhaled deeply, then walked forward, carrying the weight of justice and revenge. Inside the grand boardroom, Richard stood tall, his silver hair gleaming under the ceiling lights. He smiled with arrogance as James entered. Richard said, "You look like a man with nothing left to lose." James placed the folder on the table with a thud. He said, "No, Richard, I look like a man with proof." Richard smirked, unfazed. He replied, "Proof means nothing when power decides the truth." Emily shifted nervously at the doorway, her hands trembling. Daniel's eyes narrowed, whispering, "Careful, James, he's baiting you." Richard walked closer, his voice dripping venom. He said, "You should have stayed broken. Now I'll ruin you again." James' chest rose with fire as he met his enemy's gaze. He said, "You'll answer for every scar you left behind." Mark stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the confrontation. Richard said coldly, "End this, Mark. Do what you're paid for." James' chest tightened as the enforcer approached. But then Mark stopped, his fists unclenching. He said, "I've done enough for you. I won't be your weapon anymore." Richard's face twisted with rage. He barked, "You're nothing without me." Mark's voice was steady now, his eyes finally free. He said, "I was nothing because of you." James' eyes widened at the shift, hope flickering in the fire. Daniel whispered, "The chains are breaking." Emily gasped softly, covering her mouth as Richard's empire cracked from within. James' heart thundered, sensing the balance tipping. He said firmly, "Your own man has turned against you, Richard. The truth is here, and so is your downfall." The confrontation ignited into chaos. Richard lunged across the table, snatching at the folder. James grabbed it back, their hands colliding like two worlds at war. Richard snarled, "You'll never take me down." James shouted, "It's already over." The papers scattered like falling leaves, exposing names, dates, and betrayals across the glossy floor. Emily gasped, her eyes darting at the evidence. Daniel yelled, "This is the truth revealed." Richard's fists slammed into James, but James fought back, rage surging like fire. Mark stood frozen, then stepped in, pulling Richard back. He said, "Enough. You've destroyed too many lives." Richard's eyes blazed with venom, his empire collapsing in the very room where he once ruled. James stood panting, his knuckles bruised, but his spirit unbroken. The room fell into silence, the only sound the shuffle of scattered papers. Richard slumped in Mark's grip, his polished mask shattered. James stood tall, chest heaving, his eyes filled with fire. He said, "You can't bury the truth anymore." Richard's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of fear. Daniel's voice cut through the air, steady as stone. He said, "This is the reckoning you always feared." Emily stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. She said, "It's over, Richard." James clenched his fists, staring at the man who had stolen so much from him. He whispered, "Every scar you gave me became a weapon against you." Richard's shoulders sagged, the empire he built collapsing under the weight of truth. James felt the fire inside shift from rage to triumph. The battle was won, but the cost still echoed in his soul. James walked alone through the city streets, dawn breaking after the storm of betrayal. His body ached from the fight, but his spirit carried the weight of victory. He whispered, "It's over, but not without scars." The morning air was crisp, cutting through the remnants of exhaustion. He thought of Richard's broken smirk, the shattered mask of power. James said, "You destroyed my career, but you couldn't destroy me." His reflection in the glass buildings showed a man transformed, no longer the victim of manipulation but a survivor forged in fire. Each step echoed like a promise, not to forget, not to forgive, but to carry the lesson. His chest rose with the first sense of freedom he'd felt in years, though the cost pressed against him like a shadow. James whispered, "This city took everything, but it gave me back myself." Emily sat beside James on a park bench later that day, silence heavier than words. Her eyes were swollen from tears, but she faced him with courage. Emily whispered, "I betrayed you once, but I stayed when it mattered. James turned, pain flickering in his gaze. He replied, "Your choices cut deep, Emily. But you also stood in the fire with me." She nodded, her voice breaking. She said, "I was weak before. Now I want to be strong beside you." James sighed, his chest heavy with conflict. He whispered, "Trust doesn't rebuild in a day. But loyalty proved in flames can't be denied." Emily's lips trembled, relief softening her face. For the first time since betrayal, James allowed himself to breathe without anger choking him. Daniel approached them quietly, his presence steady like the old oak trees around the park. He said, "You walked the line and didn't fall, James. That takes more than strength. It takes soul." James lifted his gaze, still torn between relief and exhaustion. He said, "I almost lost myself in the fire." Daniel nodded slowly, eyes filled with understanding. He whispered, "That's the cost of revenge. It burns the enemy, but it always burns you too." Emily looked down, her hand tightening on her lap. James said firmly, "I chose not to stop, because stopping meant letting Richard win." Daniel's voice softened with pride. He said, "And now you must choose again, whether to live in the ashes or build something new." Silence settled, heavy with meaning. James stood by Sarah's hospital bed, the beeping machine still marking her fragile existence. Her eyes opened faintly as she whispered, You stopped him?" James leaned close, his voice steady but soft. He said, "Richard will never hurt anyone again. He's finished." Sarah's lips curved into a weak smile, tears slipping down her cheeks. She whispered, "Then my pain, it wasn't in vain." James' chest tightened, holding her hand gently. He whispered, "You gave me strength when I was broken. I carried your voice with me." Sarah closed her eyes, her breathing even, the faint peace of justice settling over her frail body. James bowed his head, tears stinging his eyes, knowing the fight had brought her hope, even if it couldn't heal her scars. Night blanketed the city once more as James walked across a bridge, the river below reflecting shimmering lights. He stopped at the center, gripping the railing, his mind heavy with echoes. He whispered, "I lost a career, I lost trust, but I gained the truth." The wind tugged at his jacket, the hum of the city fading into silence. He thought of Richard's smirk, Emily's tears, Daniel's warnings, and Sarah's frail smile. His eyes narrowed as he said softly, "Justice was never clean, but it was mine to claim." He turned, stepping away from the railing, leaving behind the broken man who first entered this fight. His silhouette vanished into the city's glow, carrying both scars and strength into the unknown future. The final silence spoke louder than words, a haunting echo of survival and fire.